Hello, Andy Quirkus here. In this video, I will be addressing my fellow members of the HMC Transportation Committee regarding the topic of disability inclusion. I'm sharing my thoughts in a video because we're meeting in a new location and unfamiliar environments overwhelm me. I'd like to start by defining some terms that are essential for discussing disability respectfully. First, the difference between impairment and disability. Impairment refers to someone's physical or mental condition that varies from the norm, and disability refers to the restriction in activities. Disability is also a legal term that can help people with disabilities get their needs met. The difference between impairment and disability might make more sense in relation to the medical and social models of disability. The medical model is the more traditional model. It treats disability as an individual issue and addresses disability by trying to correct impaired bodies. The social model was created by activists with disabilities in response to the medical model. It treats disability as socially constructed and addresses disability by working to remove barriers created by society. I can use myself as an example. I have a hearing impairment that prevents my unaided ears from hearing most speech sounds. Lots of social settings rely on people's ability to hear speech. This prevents me from participating in a variety of social activities. For example, at our district council's annual meeting in December, I couldn't hear very much of what was said. The medical model might address this by having me get my hearing aids tuned up or upgraded, whereas the social model might have people use a microphone while speaking at the meeting. In January, the Advisory Council on Aging, ACOA, sent a representative to speak at our committee meeting, and she expressed a negative attitude toward disability by treating disabled as an offensive, degrading description. I found that to be pretty hurtful. I want to help our committee avoid similarly offending community members with disabilities. One way to be more inclusive is to avoid framing disability as a negative thing. For example, instead of saying someone suffers from a cognitive impairment, just say they have a cognitive impairment. Also, say that someone uses a wheelchair, rather than saying that they are wheelchair-bound or confined to a wheelchair. And don't treat disabled as an insult. This also applies to words like blind, deaf, mentally ill, and so on. Finally, avoid euphemisms such as differently abled or handicapable. These words are often seen as patronizing, and using them implies that disabled is a negative label. Another language consideration that comes up often in discussions of disability is whether to use person-first or identity-first language. If we say, Metro Mobility gives rides to people with disabilities, that's person-first language. If we say, Metro Mobility gives rides to disabled people, that's identity-first language. Person-first language is more widely preferred, so it's good to use that if you're unsure. However, some disabled people, including me, prefer identity-first language. Try to mirror how people talk about themselves, or simply ask what they prefer. And remember, many disabilities are invisible. Don't assume that you know who around you has a disability. I've seen St. Paul miss the mark on disability inclusion with a number of transportation-related things lately. For one thing, in the city's research about what pedestrians want, they linguistically excluded people who use wheelchairs. Almost all the survey questions asked about walking. The preliminary pedestrian plan is very walking-centered as well. Plus, on the Walking St. Paul webpage, the only wheelchair in the clip art is being pushed by someone who's walking. Compare this to these two versions of the accessibility icon. Look at the traditional accessibility icon, which was created in the 1960s. Then look at the newer accessibility icon that self-advocates with disabilities and allies have created. The Walking St. Paul webpage graphically represents people with disabilities in a very different way than they've asked to be portrayed. Then there's the crosswalk safety video we were shown last year. It doesn't comply with the WCAG, that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, because the closed captions are inaccurate and there's no audio description or alternative info for people with low vision. I emailed someone from the city and I offered to fix the captions on a volunteer basis, but no one responded. So those are some communication problems, where the City of St. Paul has not been inclusive in distributing and collecting information. It's also important to be mindful of how public spaces are set up to include or exclude various types of people. When our committee meetings have been canceled on short notice, that has made us less accessible for people who use Metro Mobility, since they have to schedule their rides in advance. I feel like we've been doing better with that, though, so good job on that. Next time we hold a community event, I hope we can list some accessibility information in the event description. I've been doing research on some checklists for that. Some people with disabilities ignore event invitations that don't include accessibility info. The city does have an advisory council for people with disabilities. I went to their meeting in February. It seems like they've been less active for a while and are trying to get some momentum again. I plan to continue attending, and I'm considering applying for a position on that committee. I learned at that meeting that St. Paul is working on getting an ADA coordinator. When that happens, I'll want to connect with them about a few concerns I have about ADA compliance. In the meantime, I may try again to obtain permission to provide accurate closed captions for that crosswalk safety video. Okay, that's all. Now I can try to answer any questions you have.